and welcome to today's webinar on robustness in radiation therapy by RaySearch Laboratories. I'm Anna Deming, one of the editors of Physics World, and I'll be chairing, and to present the webinar we have Erik Engwall and Erik Korevaar. Erik Engwall holds a PhD in physics from Uppsala University in Sweden and is chief physicist at RaySearch Laboratories. Engwall heads a group of physicists working mainly in the areas of dose computation and advanced planning tools for photons, electrons, protons, and heavier ions. And he has also been involved in developing proton therapy functionality in RayStation for several years, and more recently has been responsible for the development of the Robustness Evaluation Workspace. In addition, he conducts research on the delivery of proton pencil beam scanning plans under organ motion. Erik Korevaar received a PhD degree for his work on electron beam treatment optimization by combination of intensity-modulated electron and photon beams, and completed his medical physics residency at the Erasmus MC Rotterdam. He introduced IMRT as a postdoc at the University Hospital in Zurich, Switzerland, and worked as a research engineer at RaySearch Laboratories in Stockholm, Sweden. Korevaar now has a medical physics staff position at the University Medical Center in Groningen, in the Netherlands, where he works on the improvement of intensity-modulated photon and proton treatments. His special interests are auto-planning, including multi-criteria optimization, prioritized optimization, and machine learning, and the improvement of robustness evaluation by the use of more realistic error scenarios and the transition from dosimetric to biological endpoints. So thank you very much for joining us for the webinar, Erik Engwall and Erik Korevaar. Now let's hit off with Erik Engwall first. Thank you.
Hello everybody, I'm the first Erik, the one from RaySearch, and I will start this webinar. Robustness is a topic of high interest to me, and given the large number in the audience, I believe also of high interest to the community. The first question we then could ask ourselves is why? Why do we have this interest? Well, we tend to plan something. Yeah, I'm getting a bit hungry this time of the day. But then there are bumps on the road, and things do not really turn out the way we wanted. The same holds true in radiotherapy. We have setup errors, density interpretation errors, changes in the patient anatomy during treatment that will give a different delivered dose distribution than we planned. So we need to take these uncertainties into account when we create our treatment plans and also assess the results of the treatment plan we created. I will first look into robust planning techniques and then into evaluation of robustness. If we look at the uncertainties and how they can be incorporated in the planning procedure, the traditional way is to work with margins. We create a CTV from the GTV, if we have internal motion, adding an ITV, and then accounting for setup errors with the PTV. The CTV to PTV margin, or ITV to PTV margin, can be set according to the famous recipe of Marcel van Herk to achieve 95% of the prescribed dose in 90% of the patient population. The PTV concept works fairly well in photon therapy due to the static dose cloud approximation, but in some cases, especially if we have heterogeneities, it is not the best choice. And in particle therapy, the PTV concept completely breaks down. So this is the rationale for robust optimization. Robust optimization includes the uncertainties in the optimization itself, and we can then plan directly on the CTV. It is sometimes referred to as inverse planning of margins. Robust optimization was pioneered by RaySearch by introducing it in a clinical treatment planning system in 2014. We had started developing the concept of robust optimization several years earlier, with Albin Fredriksson doing his PhD jointly at RaySearch and at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. And he developed large parts of our robustness module. We have strongly believed in robust optimization from the very beginning and have during the years been out talking to a lot of clinics. it has been quite an interesting journey, I must say. Already from the beginning, many physicists were amazed and thought this would be the way forward, but also feared that it would be difficult to convince the clinicians to abandon the widely adopted PTV concept. But now, less than 5 years after the first clinical release, robust optimization has become a standard tool in ion therapy and also gains momentum in photon therapy. If you would like to know more about the technical background of robust optimization and how it can improve treatment plans, I recommend this excellent review article from late last year by Unkelbach and other robust optimization experts, including our co-workers Rasmus Bokrans and Albin Fredriksson. Robust optimization is implemented in RayStation as a min-max optimization, which means that we always try to minimize the objective functions in the worst case scenario. We support robust optimization with respect to setup and range uncertainties, as well as anatomical changes. And now it's time to switch to the application to see how it looks. In this case, we have a 4D CT set for a lung cancer patient. You see how the patient anatomy is moving here. And this can then be treated with the robust optimization taking the 4D images into account. So if we move to the plan optimization module, we can see in the 3D view that we have this lung cancer patient. We have 5 beams, which we will treat with IMRT. For the objectives, we treat on the CTV with robust functions here. And the settings for that can be given in the robustness settings dialog, where you see that we will include all the image sets in the 4D CT set. And that gives 10 different scenarios that we will optimize on simultaneously. We could also add setup uncertainty here, and then we will get 1 error in each of these 6 directions and 1 in the middle. And for each of them, you look at the 10 different images. So that will be 7 times 10, equating to 70 different scenarios to compute. We will not do that during this demo to just save some time. It takes approximately 2 minutes on this computer with intermediate CC dose computation and also final dose computation, but it's a bit too much anyway. So we'll just do the 10 scenarios here, and we will start optimization. It will first initialize and then starting after 7 iterations, it do the conversion and also the dose computation of all beams for the 10 scenarios on the GPU with the collapsed cone dose engine. And then the iterations are going on trying to minimize the worst case scenario. So it's optimizing over all scenarios, and then at the end it computed the final dose. So now we have a final dose distribution with collapsed cone. Everything was computed on GPU. This could of course also be done for protons, and there it's even more important. Here we also have a lung cancer patient with a 4D CT dataset. It's 3 beams, and we can see that's a proton PBS plan on the spot pattern with different energy layers. Also here we plan on the CTV with robust functions. The settings is that we take all the 10 images into account. We have setup error of 5 millimeters, so that's 7 sets of errors. And then we do have the range uncertainty with including -3%, 0, and 3%. So that turns out to be 3 times 7 times 10, 210 scenarios to compute in total, which we will of course not do here live, but it's totally feasible to include all these uncertainties in planning. So if we then move on to the presentation again, we can say that we saw this the possibility to use the 4D images. We can also use additional CT images that have been acquired at different times. But we also have the possibility to simulate organ motion to generate artificial additional CTs. And then we can include these images in the robust optimization itself. The simulation is performed by specifying which organs are allowed to move and which organs are fixed. An interesting application of robust optimization is the creation of smooth field junctions when the target is larger than the available field size of the machine. And here we see an example of a craniospinal patient where we get a very nice and smooth junction between the fields in the spine, making it less sensitive to movements between the fields. Let's now move to the evaluation of robustness. We have actually just recently, with the release of RayStation 8B in December, launched a brand new module for robustness evaluation, and we will look at that within short. But first, I have a question. We already spent quite some time on talking about the benefits of robust optimization. So is that not enough? Well, we need to assess the results of our resulting treatment plan, since there could be conflicting objectives and constraints in the optimization. And we are not certain that the resulting treatment plan is as robust as we asked for. Then there is also a question which might be a bit surprising to hear from me, but I ask it anyway. Is everything always suitable for robust optimization? I would say maybe not, because adding more and more uncertainties into the optimization can lead to a very high computational complexity with a very high number of scenarios. That will cost time and memory, of course. And also, while doing this, adding these more and more uncertainties, we might add too large margins. And there is always this balance between trying to cover the target under as many scenarios as possible and sparing normal tissue. So we have to be a bit careful when adding too much uncertainties. Therefore, a good approach would be to add new complex combinations of uncertainties first in the evaluation module. And last but not least, margins are still used and will continue to be, at least in the foreseeable future. With the robustness module, we can assess the robustness of the plans regardless of how the treatment plan was created. So it could be margin-based or robustly optimized. It doesn't matter. So we see a high motivation for robustness evaluation in a treatment planning system, and also high demand from the community, especially within particle therapy. But a very good thing is that it is modality independent, so we can start to compare the robustness of different modalities. The main features of the robust evaluation module are DVH clusters, showing all evaluated scenarios simultaneously. Robust clinical goals, where the clinical goals are evaluated over all scenarios. And if you want more spatial information on where the errors occur, we also have the possibility to view full dose distributions in the patient views, either looking at individual scenario doses or aggregate dose measures like the Voxel-wise minimum or the Voxel-wise maximum, which we'll look into shortly. So now I again would like to turn to the application and see what this looks like. So when we have created the treatment plan, then the first thing we would like to do when we come into the robustness module, which is here, it's situated under the plan evaluation. You have the robust evaluation here. Then what we do, the first thing is to go in and create our new scenario group. And it looks very much like the robust optimization settings module. So here I can give this a name. I will aim for 5 millimeter setup error and 3% range error. So we give that the name. It could be named whatever we want. And then I choose my errors here. It's 5 millimeter then. And that will be given along the diagonal endpoints here. So it's 5 millimeters in these directions, but they will be equated differently in right, left, inferior, superior, posterior, anterior. And then we could also do it just along the axis endpoint. So then you see the resulting patient shifts. You recognize the 5 millimeters. Or you can do them together. So then we have these 6 point plus the 8 points at the corners of the cube. So that's 14 different scenarios. And then we add which density uncertainty points we would like to evaluate. And as I said, in this case, I would like to go for 3%. And we can then decide how many discretization points we would like to have. And now I put 33, but the normal one could be 3 or 2. So in this case, we do include the 0. If I just had 2, we do not. So in this case, we have 14 times 3, 42 different scenarios to compute, and then we can choose to compute the scenario doses directly. And if we have done that, what we get is then the DVH cluster. So this plan that I'm showing now is a 2-beam proton pencil beam scanning plan, which was planned on the PTV. We can see here in the plan optimization module how it looked. In the nominal case for the CTV, it looks fine. It is planned on the PTV. And going back to the robust evaluation where we have created its scenario group with the 42 different scenarios. The first thing we see is the DVH cluster, and you can directly see that you have lost a lot of dose compared to the nominal dose distribution, which is given here in white dashed. So already here, it's seen that this is not a robust treatment plan, and that's a very good visual direct inspection of the robustness. Then we also have the clinical goals, which are the same for the normal treatment plan, and we can evaluate the clinical goals over all scenarios simultaneously. So here we see that for the minimum dose of clinical goal, only 14% of the scenarios pass this specific clinical goal, which is, of course, not sufficient. And also for the others, it's not working well. Only for the max dose objective, and that can also be seen in DVH, we are fine. If we would like some more spatial information, we could go to the dose views and scroll through the patient views for an individual scenario. And we can also toggle between the different scenarios by moving with these arrow buttons. You see what is the density perturbation and the patient shift up here. And you also see that you have the corresponding DVH switching. And in the clinical goals, you see the current scenario changing. So you can get the clinical goal evaluated for that specific scenario. If you have identified a problematic DVH curve here, you could also go to the DVH cluster and click on that specific DVH curve to look at the dose distribution. And if you would like to go from the clinical goals, we also have the worst scenario, and that is also clickable. So I find that by clicking, and will be different depending on different clinical goals. So this for an organ at risk will, of course, be different from what we had for the CTV. And what we could do more, if it's, too cumbersome to look at all these different 42 scenarios, is to look at the aggregate dose distributions, the voxel-wise minimum or the voxel-wise maximum. So a voxel-wise minimum takes the minimum dose in each voxel evaluated over all scenarios. So that will generate one dose distribution. The voxel-wise maximum works in the same way, taking the maximum dose in each voxel over all scenarios. So the voxel-wise minimum is good to look at coverage, and voxel-wise maximum, on the other hand, to see some risk for the organs at risk. So if we look at this plan in the voxel-wise minimum way, we see that it's now just one dose distribution type we can look at. And as Erik Korevaar will show within short, the voxel-wise minimum dose distribution can be used to assess the target coverage and can also be linked to standard dose coverage methods for the PTV. He will show that if the 95% isodose line covers the CTV, this is close to a V95 dose criterion on the PTV. And here we see that the 95% dose line in red does not at all cover the CTV. So we have quite a lot of loss of dose here. And this is directly seen in the spatial views and could then be replacing what you do with your PTV when looking in patient views. Now we are, of course, interested to see how this would look like for a robustly optimized plan. So this is the same plan, but it was robustly optimized with 5 millimeter setup error and 3% range error. And then you directly see that the DVHs, they are very close to the nominal DVH. We also have clinical goals that are passing in many of the cases. We see that voxel-wise minimum dose distribution covers the CTV almost completely. So this is a really nice and robust plan. We can also have separate clinical goals for the voxel-wise minimum. So for this case, you can see that 98% of the volume will have a specific goal for the voxel-wise minimum given here. Of course, this could be done also for photons. So here is a photon plan. It's the same patient as we saw in the very beginning when we did the robust optimization, but this time it's a VMAT plan. It has been planned on the PTV and computed those like that. And as you can see, we have a nice coverage of the CTV here, and we can also see that in the voxel-wise minimum dose distribution, it covers the CTV very well. Looking at the clinical goals, we have some fails, but that is only for the organs at risk. So it's for the spinal cord, the chest wall, for 2 of the clinical goals. So in this case, we are happy with the coverage of the target. But if we then compare it to a robustly optimized plan for the same setting of arcs and everything, we see that we cover the target. We are all green for the clinical goals. And we see also that the DVHs for the organs at risk are lower in this case, which was also seen by looking at different clinical goals here. That could also be seen when scrolling through the patient views. You see that the red 95% isodose line covers the CTV completely, but it is a much smaller surrounding than it was for the PTV plan, which also shows that we will have more dose to surrounding tissue in the PTV case. So for this case, robust optimization was really good to reduce the organ at risk dose. And that's what we would like to see here in the module now. So I will go on and talk in the presentation. So this is what we have seen now was the first version of robust evaluation. There is much more to come in later versions. We would like to add organ motion uncertainty. We would like to have independent beams, the same as we have in robust optimization. We would like to add the random errors to have them different in different fractions, and then combine them to a full treatment course, making that one scenario. We would like to include interplay effects, and actually that is already included in the research version of the robust evaluation module. And in fact, there is a bonus video, which you can see at the very end of this presentation. And it could be watched if you want, of course. And there will be much, much more. But what is really good is that we could come up with many different complex combinations of error scenarios, and that will be specified in this dialogue. But the simple and straightforward evaluation interface remains the same. So regardless of how the errors are, you will directly see in your DVH cluster with the clinical goals and the aggregate dose measures if your plan is robust or not. So the evaluation itself will be very quick. This was the end of my part, and it actually turned out quite the way I planned it. Some glitches, but not too much. We were quite robust. So now it's time to hand over to Erik Korevaar to present implementation and results of robust optimization and evaluation in the clinic.
Thank you, Erik, for inviting me to talk about this interesting topic. I'm from the University Medical Center Groningen, where we treat patients with photon and proton therapy. My talk consists of two parts. First, robust optimization for photon and proton treatments to improve robustness of CTV dose and also reduce organ at risk dose. And in the second part of my talk, I will talk about robustness evaluation in order to verify the robustness of an optimized plan. And I will go into acceptance criteria, where you go over from PTV-based planning to robust planning. You will need to come up with criteria for the CTV, which are in agreement with the PTV criteria. The purpose of the PTV is to ensure coverage of the CTV by a high dose with a high probability, despite deviations between planned treatment and delivery. Well, the limitation of the PTV is that it assumes a static dose cloud. This means that it is assumed that when a setup error occurs, the dose does not change in shape. Well, this is not always true, also not in photons. For instance, here we have two tangential fields and a breast treatment. So the CTV is covered by the 95 isodose line, but if you now take into account a setup error, a possible setup error, the CTV is expanded to a PTV, and the PTV is now outside of the patient, and it looks like the PTV is underdosed, because the PTV is not covered by the 95 isodose line. So we assume that if the patient is shifted, the CTV will be underdosed. This is, however, not true, because if we would recalculate the dose with the shifted patient, we would see that the dose would change in shape, and actually the CTV is not underdosed. So here the PTV is misleading us. It's telling us that the CTV might be underdosed, where this is not really the case. For protons, we have another issue, and this is the proton range error. When range errors occur, the dose will actually also change in shape. So also here the static dose cloud assumption is not true for protons. So let's first look at robust optimization for head and neck. Here we have to deal with setup errors. The animation shows the variation in patient position taken from daily cone beam CTs. And we wondered to what extent the dose changes in shape when a setup error occurs. So for this, we shifted the patient in lateral direction and recomputed the dose in the patient for all these shifted positions. What you then can see is that the dose shifts relatively to the patient, but what also is visible is that, especially when you zoom in, that when the patient is shifted, the dose also changes in shape. So you see on the top right that the dose behind the air cavity is changing, and the reason that this is happening is that when the patient is shifting, beams go through different part of the anatomy, so through different densities, and this has an effect on the dose. So here we can also see the inaccuracy of the static dose cloud assumption. Now the next question was, can we improve treatments by using robust optimization instead of PTV-based planning? So we took 10 cases from the clinic that were treated and planned on a PTV. And then we estimated the actually given dose by accumulating the dose over 35 daily cone beam CTs. Then we reviewed the coverage of the CTV on this given dose, actually given dose, and also looked at NTCP reductions using these 3 complication models. Here's the result. So the coverage of the CTV was slightly improved using robust optimization, but more importantly, the NTCP values were reduced by using the robust optimization. So there was 2 benefits were visible, and the maximum benefit was for xerostomia, which could be reduced by 2.8% on average. In proton planning, robust optimization is more common. We investigated the benefit of robust optimization for head and neck cancer. So we planned on using an IMRT technique, which is on the top left, using a PTV-based IMPT, proton technique in the middle, and then the top right is robust optimized IMPT. If you look at the dose in the nominal situation, so no errors are considered, then the high and the low dose CTVs are properly covered. But now if you take into account errors and recalculate the dose, then what can be seen is that the IMRT on the bottom left and the robust optimized IMPT in the bottom right is still robust. But in case of PTV-based IMPT, you can see that possible underdoses occur in the CTV. This is a result from the same study. In blue, the nominal D98, which was good in all plants. But then if we recalculate, taking into account the errors, you can see that the PTV plant IMPT D98 was too low, below our threshold, and increasing the number of fields had only a limited effect. On the other side, robust plant IMPT was robust for all number of fields. So now I come to the second part of my talk, robustness evaluation. I will first go into the definitions, then we'll talk about acceptance criteria, and we'll finish with some examples. A treatment scenario describes all the errors in a full fractionated treatment course. And then the scenario dose is the corresponding accumulated dose for all fractions of the treatment scenario. I mention this because it's sometimes thought that a scenario it only applies to a single fraction, but it's important to realize that we are looking or interested in the total dose for the whole treatment. Errors can be sampled in two ways. First, the probabilistic sampling, where we sample from a known error distribution, which is shown as the Gaussian. And the errors are sampled randomly within a confidence interval, which is the gray area. This is an accurate method, but the disadvantage is that it is very computation intensive. We would need many samples, and this takes a lot of calculation time. So what we do instead is sparse sampling, where we take the worst case errors at the confidence level, which is indicated by the red lines. Now we have to choose our setup error. The setup error consists of a systematic error and a day-to-day variation. And the way that the error is calculated is using the well-known Van Herk margin recipe. This consists of a systematic part and a day-to-day part. The day-to-day error results in a dose blurring, and the effect of the dose blurring is a systematic shrinkage of the 95 isodose line, which is then added to or included in the margin. So the shifts we apply in the robustness evaluation is the same as our CTV to PTV margin. We also have to choose directions. Also here we have to limit ourselves because of to keep the calculation time low, and we chose a number of 14 directions as shown in this figure. For protons, we also have the range error, so the density or the Hounsfield units are scaled down or up by 3%, and this results in 14 scenarios for photons and 28 scenarios for protons. Now these scenario doses have to be reviewed, and it's not possible in a busy clinic to review all those dose distributions for a single plan. So we have to come up with a solution, and the solution for that is to look at the Voxel-wise worst dose. This was already described by Erik Engwall in the previous talk, but I will quickly go through it. Here's an example of 3 scenario doses, D1 to D3. And the Voxel-wise minimum dose is now constructed by taking the lowest dose value for each voxel for all the scenarios. So this Voxel-wise minimum dose is a summary of the lowest doses or the errors that can occur in all the scenarios. And the Voxel-wise maximum dose is constructed in a similar way, so it gives the maximum dose per voxel for all the scenarios. Here's an example where we have an IMRT treatment and computed the 95 isodose line, which is the yellow region, for different setup errors. And we're iterating through all these different scenario doses. What you can see then is that the CTV in blue is covered by the 95 isodose line. And what you can also see that the dose is quite conformal because the 95 isodose line is just barely covering the CTV. It's more easy to look at it in the form of the Voxel-wise minimum dose, where you can see the same. This dose is very conformal to the target. Now we compare this result to the PTV evaluation, where we did not take into account the errors. You can see that the 95 isodose line is wider, and it now covers very nicely the PTV. So the similarity in coverage is is in good agreement between these two evaluations. For instance, if you look at the caudal side, of the patient or of the caudal side of the target. You can see in the PTV evaluation that we are missing a part of the PTV. And this is also seen in the Voxel-wise minimum dose, where we are missing a small part of the CTV. So these two pictures give you the same information. Now, when we go from PTV-based planning to a Voxel-wise minimum dose, or PTV evaluation to the Voxel-wise minimum dose evaluation, it's important that we are not introducing any bias. We don't want to be more conservative regarding treating the CTV, but also we don't want to be less conservative. Now, the way to solve this is to do a calibration, calibrate the new evaluation method against the current PTV. So when we take a number of plans, for all these plans we can compute the PTV D98 and we can rank them. Some plans are below the criteria and some are above. For the same plans now we can compute the CTV Voxel-wise minimum D98 and we expect and hope to have a good correlation between the two metrics, and if this is so, we can translate our PTV D98 criterion into one to apply to the Voxel-wise minimum D98. Here another example for a head and neck VMAT where there are two targets, a low and a high dose target. The 95 isodose line is in green and in orange, and both PTVs are well covered by the 95 isodose line. The dose is quite conformal. Now if you look in the middle image at the Voxel-wise minimum dose, we can see that similar as in the PTV, but now the CTVs are very nicely covered by the 95 isodose line. So again here a good agreement between the PTV evaluation and the Voxel-wise minimum dose evaluation on the CTV. Now on the right side we see the Voxel-wise maximum dose. Here the 95 isodose line is expanded, but more importantly what you can see here is that the hotspot is present near the bone, which can be explained by a shifted patient position that is leading to beams going through different densities like bone and tissue, and this may result in a hotspot. So this is something that was not visible from the PTV evaluation in the nominal dose. Here another example of an esophagus case. On the left hand side the PTV, also a good conformity of the 95 isodose line to the PTV. Then in the middle the Voxel-wise minimum dose. Also here there's a good agreement because the 95 isodose line has a good conformity to the CTV. And on the right hand side the Voxel-wise maximum dose, and here we noticed also a hotspot, and this is a coronal view, and the hotspot can be explained by beams going from lateral directions. So we are using full VMAT here, and when the patient is shifting in the cranial-caudal direction, these beams may go through either lung or tissue with density 1. So there's a steep gradient in density, and this may lead to a hotspot. Also here this hotspot was not visible in the nominal dose. Now a result for the calibration. We have here various photon plans, 50 plans. On the x-axis the PTV D98, and on the y-axis the Voxel-wise minimum CTV D98. But you can see there's a very good agreement, or there's a good correlation between the two metrics. Correlation coefficient is nearly 1. And the slope of this line is close to unity. It is 0.9% below unity. This means that on average the CTV D98 in the Voxel-wise minimum dose is 0.9% lower than the PTV D98. So you can consider to adjust your criteria for when you use the CTV D98. Here is the result for the Voxel-wise maximum dose. So on the x-axis the D2 of the PTV, and on the y-axis the Voxel-wise maximum dose for the CTV, also the D2. Also here a very good correlation coefficient, and the slope of this line is unity plus 2.3%, which means that on average in the Voxel-wise maximum dose the D2 is 2.3% higher than in the PTV evaluation. So when you go over from PTV planning to robust planning with robustness evaluation on a Voxel-wise maximum dose, you have to take into account that you will on average see somewhat higher D2 values for the same plan. Further developments are using a repeat CT, so you can take into account changes in the patient from week to week. This is what we do standard for our head and neck proton treatments in our center. So we apply the robustness evaluation method on repeat CT scans. Another development is using day-to-day setup errors. Currently we have an approximated we approximate the effect of the day-to-day variation, and this could be improved by explicitly calculating the dose for different days with different errors. And finally, another development is taking into account breathing motion and accumulate dose over 40 CTs. An example of that is given in this slide. This is from a publication, a very recent publication. We start on the left with an RT plan, and this RT plan we can derive from a log file. This way we include possible machine errors. Then the plan is divided into subplans. The number is the same as the number of phases of the 40 CT. Then in this way we can take into account anatomical changes, breathing motion and interplay effects, and also use the setup error and the range error. So this is a very comprehensive robustness evaluation. So to summarize, the benefits of robust optimization for photons and protons is that it results in a robust CTV dose and a reduced organ at risk dose. For robustness evaluation, we found that the Voxel-wise minimum dose agrees well with the PTV minimum dose, and an adjustment of the criteria were established by using a calibration against PTV evaluations. So this was my end of my talk, and I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Thank you and goodbye.